Thank you for coming. I'm curious who in this room currently has a Buddhist practice or is studying the work of the Buddha, the philosophy of Buddhism. Either one. Okay, great. That helps me just understand a little bit. Also, who is, this would be good, I expect all hands to fly up. Who is experienced with psychedelics? Pretty much everybody. Okay, great. And then who said, who raised their hand to the first two questions? Both. Okay, excellent. Thank you. So I want to mention that I'm not a Buddhist, yet I'm very interested in Buddhism. I'm passionately interested. I write about it. I study it. I try to practice it regularly. Sometimes I am neglectful of it, but mostly. But I don't identify with it. I think it's kind of antithetical to Buddhism itself to be using it to add to your identity. Buddhism is about decreasing your identity and being more open and one with everything. So I find it difficult to say I'm Buddhist. So I like to make a point of saying I'm not, and why. I also eat like a vegan, but I'm not a vegan, and there is a difference. So I thought I'd tell you a little bit about the genesis of my work and how I got into both Buddhism and psychedelics and why they seem to me to be an important conversation in the time that we're living in. In the early 80s, I abandoned a successful career in the film business. It was all going my way, but it was profoundly boring. And I decided that I needed to travel and open myself up to other ways of being and other cultures. I went to China, traveled around for a couple of months, went to India, and fell in love with India. I just really got totally bhaktied out, cut my hair, was wearing weird clothes, and just enjoying the hell out of every moment of life, and just I love vegetarian food. I love Indian food in particular, so I'm not sure I ever wanted to come back. But I did have to plan to come back after about a year. And a young woman who I was friendly with told me that, you really need to go to Sri Lanka and do a Buddhist meditation retreat. I said, what? But anyway, she wrote out exactly what I should do, where I should go, and I followed her advice. And it was awful. I mean, every bone in my body hurt from my foot to my head. It was miserable. Breakfast was stewed greens at 4 in the morning, and the same stewed greens at noon, and no dinner. It was just intolerable, and there were bugs, and I was just in a state of complete misery. And then about 2 days before the retreat was over, something quite miraculous happened, and I still don't really understand what it is, and it keeps me tuned to Buddhism to try to find out. All of the pain just left my body. I immediately felt just so comfortable with who I was and the world I was in. I felt so integrated with it and connected to it. Not only the earth, but everyone on it, every being that was alive, even things that weren't considered alive. I just felt so amazingly happy and quietly ecstatic. And I would blink my eyes a lot and swallow a lot to make sure I wasn't dreaming. And this sort of what is called, I guess, a meditative glow persisted for about 2 or 3 months, actually. And but I was definitely looking to really discover and research what it was about that process. What did I do that brought this on? What was it, and how can I get it back again? I started studying. Due to the cleverness of the Buddhist monk there with giving me letters to deliver once I got back to the States, I ended up meeting and studying with a Theravadan teacher in LA and attending a small college there, working towards a master's and learning Pali. And then Thich Nhat Hanh came to the US, and I was fortunate enough to see him when he first came. Am I talking loud enough for you in the back? Okay, great. And so I started studying with him, and I had the confusing but delightful privilege of studying with both a Theravadan teacher and a Mahayana teacher. So that was, in fact, the both of them married me in India some years later, and I think they had a little bit of a fight as to who was going to preside. That was all very amusing. And then in the mid-'80s, when I was back in LA, and after finishing this studying with in the College of Buddhist Studies, I started working for the LA Weekly and doing, my beat was the spiritual beat with a little tongue-in-cheek, sort of chopping down a few notches, all these great egos that came to town, like Anthony Robbins and other people who, so I was, looking with a slight wink at a lot of this stuff, everything from psychoneuroimmunology to neurolinguistics, to everything in between, Thich Nhat Hanh, Terence McKenna, and Terence and I actually became friends, and then I met a psychiatrist at UCLA who had been studying with Stan Grof, and he introduced me to a lot of people in the psychedelic community and in the Bay Area and in LA. So I started going to Friday night dinners with Ann and Sasha, and when we're in the Shulgin room. And I really found the psychedelic community just amazing. They were the most heartful and interesting and intellectually curious people that I'd ever known, and all of them without exception. I was just so happy to be in a new group of friends that I could feel some connection with. They were explorers, and so I considered myself one of them, but I wasn't taking. I was pretty straight edge most of my life. It wasn't until my mid-30s that I even smoked a joint. So anyway, I had a lot of psychedelic pep talking for sure with Terence McKenna and the like. So I finally agreed to go to Hawaii and experience something called yahe, some thick, lugubrious liquid that he had brewed from a leaf of one plant and a stem of another. And there wasn't any available knowledge really about that, except I guess letters that were transmitted between William Burroughs and Allen Ginsberg called the Yahe letters. And so I didn't know what I was in for. And I knew Terence was a bit mischievous, but very clever with his dosing and his strategies for quick trips. So anyway, he showed me a place in the jungle near where he lived, and I think his idea is to make a very, very strong mix, which itself will be totally world-changing, and at the same time a bit of terror, doing it alone in the middle of the night. No hooking arms with your buddies and listening to the soothing songs of an ayahuasquero. This was like alone in the middle of the night, dealing with what was about to come, which I had no idea what it was. And it was an extraordinary experience. I won't go into detail about it. I already did in a book called Zigzag Zen, if you happen to see that, which is on sale here. But suffice to say that it was a full-blown shamanic death journey. I was basically in the company of my dead body for about 3 hours. And it was not anything like a dream. It was more real than real life. And it was, it's still, I think the experience, terrifying as it was, unpleasant as it was, still serves me to this day. It was 25 years ago, and I haven't been back with the ayahuasca since. I started going down a path that included psilocybin and MDMA, and became more psychedelically educated. And but that experience was really the most profound one in my life to this date. And when I got back to the house after the dawn was ascending, and I walked into the kitchen, and Terence was stirring a big pot like a kind of witch, and he said, "Oh, back already?" And I said, "Well, what did you do to me? Why did you do that to me? What?" He says, "Well, are you going to do it again?" I said, "Again?" I broke out into laughter and I couldn't even control the laughter. It was just overwhelming. And I said, "Why? That which doesn't kill you makes you stronger, I suppose?" He said, "No, that which kills you makes you stronger." So that was a real eye-opener. And so at that point, let's see, I've lost my track here. I did a book, produced a book called Dharma Gaya. It was about Buddhism and the environmental crisis. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama did a preface for it. And it's still in print, thank God, because even 20 years later, because comparative religion classes seem to have it on their ordering list. So, but I started to think about this whole psychedelic and Buddhist interface. As I mentioned, the psilocybin journeys actually came the closest, if anything, to putting me in a state that was similar to that state in Sri Lanka that I entered. And I was amazed at how similar that was, and where I felt so connected to the earth and everyone around me. And so, and I thought about the fact that the people who came to our culture talking about psychedelics were also talking about Buddhism. In fact, it was the same cast of characters, whether it be Alan Watts or Allen Ginsberg or Ram Dass or Jack Kerouac. I mean, there's quite a list. And the culture really went through this rapid kind of transition, as many of you know. And then I think we were more naive then, more idealistic, so something like a Manson situation really threw everybody for a tailspin. We're a little more mature now, more experienced with things and less idealistic perhaps, so I'm not worried about that happening with the coming psychedelic era, which I see signs of are entering now, because we need to, for one thing, and I'll explain why I think that's the case. But also, not everybody, needs to take psychedelics. The culture itself will be taking psychedelics. And why the culture needs to do that, I think that we are facing an unprecedented challenge ecologically. I mean, this is not news to anyone here, or anyone for that matter, but it's hard for us to keep it in our awareness that in fact, I really am ecologically conversant. I've been writing about it. I'm on the board of a group called Rainforest Action Network for 25 years, and they've been doing great work. But I still, moment to moment in my life, forget what we're facing and how we are continuing to exacerbate the problem, and primarily by not being aware moment to moment what we're facing and what we have to do to slow it down and to create a future for our children. So I was shocked to learn just before I left California that the otters that I really enjoy watching, frolic in the water off the coast of Big Sur, where I live, have now been put on the extinction list. That they're down to such numbers that they're not going to survive as a species. And there's so many species every day. In fact, Will Steffen is a professor of climate scientist and professor in Australia, and many other voices of his stature or higher have agreed with him that we are really entering the sixth great extinction, and that life is going to be very different. So I just saw the 5-minute card, and I want to just stop there, even though I have tons more to say. So why do I think that we need to be concerned about psychedelics? We obviously are anyway, but we really need tools where we can change with great profundity and with great rapidity. We can change our consciousness. I want to read, I really have 5 minutes?
I think 15.
Oh, okay. Oh, right, yes. Oh, good. So I'll steal a little bit of time from the Q&A just to read a letter from Dr. Albert Hoffman that I think you'll enjoy hearing if you haven't heard it before. This is a letter that he wrote when he was 101 years old, and he died 1 year later at 102. Alienation from nature and the loss of experience of being part of the living creation is the greatest tragedy of our materialistic era. It's the causative reason for ecological devastation and climate change. Therefore, I attribute absolute highest importance to consciousness change. I regard psychedelics as catalyzers for us. They are tools which are guiding our perception towards deeper areas of our human existence so that we can again become aware of our spiritual essence. Psychedelic experiences in a safe setting can help our consciousness open to this sensation of connection and being one with nature. LSD and related substances are not drugs in the usual sense, but are part of sacred substances which have been used for thousands of years in ritual settings. The classic psychedelics like LSD, psilocybin, mescaline are characterized by the fact that they are neither toxic nor addictive. It is my great concern to separate psychedelics from the ongoing debates about drugs and to heighten tremendous potential inherent in these substances for self-awareness as an adjunct to therapy and for fundamental research into the human mind. It is my wish that a modern Ulysses will emerge in which seeking humans can learn to have transcendent experiences with sacred substances in a safe setting. I'm convinced that these soul-opening, mind-revealing substances will find their appropriate place in our society and in our culture. Boy, that just, those words really just So why don't we, why don't you think if you have a comment or a question, and I'll pretend I have answers, and we can do a little of that. And also after, I'll be up in the book stall available to sign any books if anyone's interested. There's a new book called Zigzag Zen. It's actually a reissue of a book that came out 15 years ago. And it has a lot of art from 32 artists and some great essays by people you've heard of and some that you haven't. I recommend you look at it, and I'm happy to sign it for you if you decide to buy it. So, anybody have a question?
Gentleman,
Me?
yeah.
Yeah, I also went through a process with Theravada and considered becoming a monk, but interestingly, the thing that struck me was learning that there was a prescription against interacting with nature within that tradition. That just seemed like too much for me. But then to be in the world and to interact with nature, I subsequently lost the clarity that I had when I was there. So, I mean, there is this, sounder, the notion of the sounder. So, for me, it's a question of how we integrate psychedelic movement, people that are interested in the teachings of Buddha, and people who are actively creating solutions to the environmental crisis.
Well, that's definitely a realm that I've thought a lot about, and being involved ecologically as well as in Buddhist practice, as well as being psychedelically minded. So I'm trying to find a path of integration for all of these. I think it was Stanley Krippner, who was a parapsychologist and also a scholar of altered states, as it were. And I think he said something about why we have such a struggle integrating these various aspects of our life, that we don't enjoy a closeness to God. It's more of a theoretical construct for many people. We don't have traditions that ground us in the earth the way indigenous people have enjoyed. And anyway, he suggests that that's why, in a way, Buddhism can provide some kind of a structure for us to develop our present moment awareness and develop compassion and all of these qualities that will serve us in all of these various other pursuits. So I haven't answered your question, but it reminded me of that. It's an ongoing process of how to integrate all that. I mean, one concern I had with taking psychedelics was that it was contrary to the fifth precept, perhaps, that on intoxicants. But I was very happy, after many years of ignoring that, very happy to hear Bob Thurman come to Burning Man and tell a crowd of 500 that he thought that psychedelics that enhance, taken carefully, and that are of good quality that enhance your compassion and your ability to empathize with others is skillful means, considering the kind of crisis that we're facing. And more importantly, that to answer that concern, that the fifth precept was really about alcohol. If you look at the Pali version of that, the original language it was recorded in, it's referring to alcohol, clearly. And alcohol was a problem even in the time of the Buddha. So, anyway, any others?
Concerning your experiences in Sri Lanka and maybe experiencing Sukha or Piti or some of these points of inner happiness, and pursuing that afterwards, did you understand what it was, or did you transcend the need to actually get there again, or what is your personal growth with this experience?
Well, it's interesting. The first time I was, not actually getting attached to it, but I was just in awe of it and just enjoying it, and then it sort of faded away very gradually. And after studying Buddhism, I came up with all kinds of possible, oh, it's a stream entering experience, oh, it's this, it's that. But then I decided not to not to try to categorize. It was just too beautiful and too precious to put it, to categorize it in any way that anyone has previously set up categories. Buddhism is very fond of categories. There's 5 this and 3 of these and 8 of those and 10 of these. And it just seemed artificial and pointless to me because it was just so hard to fit into any kind of category, even though I knew there was a relationship somehow, and I wanted to pursue what that relationship was, and I still haven't totally figured it out. So, I probably never will.
Thanks for the talk, Allan. I wonder if you have any thoughts on the psychedelics in the medical field?
Psychedelics and...
Psychedelics in the medical field, references to new research and so
Yeah, oh, I mean, I don't have at hand specific references, but we're in the midst of a burgeoning of psychedelic research in the area of medicine. I mean, there's new companies forming now, like a Phytech is exploring the phytocannabinoids and how we can build our health by eating those foods that have beta-caryethylene that bind to the CB2 receptor site that promotes, reduces inflammation, reduces the potential of osteoporosis, an unbelievable list of protective health benefits that come with that kind of diet, and that's without smoking a joint. And if you want to increase your cannabinoid tone, you can drink fresh cannabis juice, you can smoke, you can take the cannabis plant. They call that increasing your cannabinoid tone. I think that's really interesting. This whole discovery of the endocannabinoid system is quite exciting in terms of what it tells us about our bodies and our relationship to plants, and it's just fantastic. But there's an enormous amount of psychedelic research going on. End-of-life studies, cancer studies. In fact, Roland Griffiths, who's here, is at Johns Hopkins preparing to do a study of long-term meditators with psilocybin, a control group without psilocybin and one with, all including long-term meditators. And he's still looking, by the way, for people who are interested in being volunteers. So, and he's here.
Who funds these things you're talking about?
Sorry?
Who funds these things? Is it corporations or is it self-funded?
It's either self-funded or academically funded or privately funded. You've heard of MAPS, I trust? Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. Rick Doblin, who is the founder of that, is here. He's been a friend of mine for 30 years, and I remember he was in my driveway when I was building a house, and he kept saying to me, "Don't you think you should look at the contractor's point of view?" I mean, I wanted to kill him, but all he talked about was how he wanted MDMA and psilocybin and all of these psychedelics to be funded by the government and supported by the government and made possible so that people could have safe psychedelic experiences. And I said, "You're dreaming, get a job, what are you talking about? You're hallucinating." Nobody could even conceive of that when he first started talking about that 30 years ago. And now it's actually happening. The government got interested, not because they want to take it over and use covert psychedelic programs against people. Maybe they do, but they're not going to probably try that again. It was a failure in the 60s. But they're interested in psychedelics now because they have a huge problem. They have soldiers coming back from theaters of war who are more likely than not wanting to kill themselves. And there's nothing that they have come up with that works on PTSD like the way psilocybin and MDMA do. And in fact, MDMA, it appears, cures PTSD in 1 or 2 sessions with therapy as
How
well.
do I get in touch with these people?
maps.org. That'll open up that whole world for you.
What do you feel
Is that brilliant?
the fact that the government's funding MDMA and psilocybin into the army? I mean, that could actually totally change the army and take away the violence and destruction and war if the knock-on effect of it. I mean, that's what happened in the 60s in a sense, wasn't it? There was a fear of that.
Yeah.
Will that happen again? Is it happening again potentially?
A lot is happening, and that might be part of what's happening, but I don't know that that is something we're going to like wait for